Hi everyone, I'm here with Janelle. And Janelle, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm Janelle Gullan from the Wild Orange Tree in Melbourne, Australia, and I help women connect to their body so that they can move through mothering with confidence, self-love, and a whole lot of vitality. So lovely to be here and chatting with you today.
So I guess today we're going to be talking about a whole range of topics about sexuality and intimacy and how that changes after giving birth. I guess to start us off, we were discussing earlier about rites of passage and what that means.
Yeah.
Are you able to elaborate on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think so often when women or people with wombs become mothers, it's just sort of, oh yeah, you've just become a mum. But this actually sits within this context of rite of passage. It's such a significant transition that we go through, and there's actually a name for it. It's called matrescence, and we're familiar with adolescence, but this matrescence transition is considered biologically maybe even more significant than what we go through with adolescence. It's stepping into this whole new body, brain, identity, hormonal shifts, and it can make a really big change to the way that we look at sex and intimacy and how we're participating in that as an everyday activity. And I think when we realise the enormity of that transition, it starts to explain some of the challenges that might come up when women are wanting to, or their partner is wanting them to re-engage in sex and intimacy, and it's just not feeling right, or some challenges come up around that.
Absolutely. And what might be some of the challenges that might arise?
Yeah, I think birth injury or uncertainty about your body after giving birth is certainly something that can worry women, just not sure about what's going on down there. And for many women, they may not actually know what down there really looked like beforehand. And I know you talk a lot about that education that we have about our bodies. But if we know that we've had a perineal tear, even a C-section scar, that can impact enormously on how we feel about engaging in sex, or uncertainty about what it's going to feel like, or pain or discomfort might come up when we actually try to have penetration or other types of sexual contact. So I think that can be a really big one for women to have some support around. Maybe that is just to explore their body and know what this new version of themselves is like, but also know there is support if some of that scar tissue is pulling or it's feeling uncomfortable. There is support around that, so that's feeling a whole lot better and makes it a little bit easier to engage in those activities that you might want to. So that's one big thing, actual birth injury and some of those physical changes that we might encounter in our body. Mm-hmm. But also recognising that huge change in roles that come along as well. We're now not just a partner and a lover and a soulmate and all those sorts of things. We're this mother as well. And it can take time to integrate that new identity into ourselves. Like traditionally, it's felt that a mothering transition takes at least 3 years, and that's enormous. Most of us don't give ourselves anywhere around that amount of time to get to know and explore this new body and this new brain that mothering has given to us. We're so often focused on the going back and assuming that we might be the same or similar to what we were before birth. But we're upgraded. We're at level 2 in the game. We've got to learn how to play again. And with some of those mothering roles, I think it's very easy for us to feel like sex is another job on the list. It's something else that someone is requiring of us. And I think that happens when we get really disconnected from our bodies through that mothering process. Like energetically, birth is a very opening experience, and sometimes that birth energy, our culture doesn't do a very good job of coming around women and helping that birth energy come down and integrate again. That can be something that plays out. And also, Also looking at sex and intimacy as something that is for you and connecting to your body, and creating that space for that rather than it just being that other job to do for someone else. And that's part of navigating that transition that we go through.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point you made about we often talk about going back to how we were, what we like, when in reality we're always moving forward and things are changing.
We
and
are.
you're starting this new chapter in your life with a new baby.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a really big question when we come through that transition is to actually ask ourselves the question, well, do we like the kind of sex that we were having previously? Maybe that's not what our body is wanting anymore. It's actually a journey to explore a whole range of options and opportunities. Like, what brings our body pleasure now? So yeah, I think that expectation that what always worked in the bedroom is going to kick right back in again, it's just not a lot of the time.
And I think we talk a lot about a lot on XES that the definition of sex is changing, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean penis in vagina or penetration. What's your thought?
And I notice that a lot in the mothers that I work with. Like, they really feel a lot more opened up to those broader definitions of what intimacy could be and how they could explore that with their partner. And there's a lot of communication and conversation that needs to happen around that. But if you're really noticing that in your own body, and the wham bam thank you Sam isn't what you're feeling like, that's okay. There is such a broader definition of how we can have that connection and intimacy with our partner, and it is an opportunity to explore those things.
And do you have any tips on how to, I guess, communicate that maybe, this type of sex isn't what you're feeling like, or that you're looking for something else? Or
because that can feel like a really scary conversation, can't it? But I think if we can bring our partner into that awareness that we're not the same anymore, educate them around that matrescence transition. And I think using the adolescent transition can be quite a good one. A lot of us remember how different we were coming through that. So using that as an analogy, and just setting up those expectations. Like, there's some lovely things like the 3-minute game, where it's just about receiving from each other for a certain amount of time, and just noticing what feels really good in our bodies without that expectation that it's going to progress to what it used to progress to. But I think talking to our partner about the fact that we are so different, and this is actually an opportunity to re-engage with each other all over again with newness and excitement and possibility there for what that can look like now, without reference to what happened in the past.
And do you feel like perhaps our social norms that we've grown up with and have been exposed to have has kind of influenced our perception of sex and what our narratives may be?
Oh, hugely so. Like, it's a topic that so many of us were never spoken to about when we were younger, let alone the nuances of how different it can feel to have sex after you've had a baby. Like, that's just taking conversation to a whole other level, isn't it? So definitely those things play out. And as we start increasing this awareness, as people like you and I have these conversations and share them, hopefully that will at least place that seed, that question of, oh, okay, maybe it isn't so abnormal that I'm feeling differently about this. Let's just start from scratch again in some ways. And I think a lot of that starting from scratch is reconnecting to your own pleasure, working out what feels good for you now. And that may be in a sexual sense. It may not always be in a sexual sense. It might be through other types of movement or creative expression and things like that as well. It's a journey of rediscovering all aspects of yourself. But making that time, even if it's just that tiny little bit each day, knowing how busy you are when you've got a little one in your life, but creating that space to reconnect to joy and pleasure in all its facets for yourself, so that you can then share that with your partner.
Mm, mm. And
Or whoever you're wanting to share that with.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And now talking about, I guess, some other challenges that might be impacted on postpartum.
Yeah.
Birth injury, how might that? What challenges would that perhaps present?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is fear or just unknown. What is this going to be like now that I know I've got some scar tissue there? Especially if some of those injuries came about through some real traumatic parts of your birth, or maybe the healing process has been a bit rough. And I think that's where that connecting to yourself first, get to know how it feels now, actually touch that scar tissue, feel it, and that can feel really confronting, even just touching that
Just frozen.
In that scar tissue. So just being open to the fact that could feel challenging in and of itself, but I think it's that first step, and going really slowly, knowing that birth injury or not, this is a new body and a new opportunity to explore your pleasure and share that with someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you think that there might ever be like an association with perhaps a negative experience if you didn't have the most positive birthing experience with?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like so much of our body, whether it's before birth or after birth, if we have negative sexual experiences where it doesn't feel so great, our body's very good at protecting us. We start getting that pelvic floor turning on and tightening, and tight isn't good. Tight's definitely not good when we're talking about sex and intimacy and penetration. But yeah, if we're going with that approach of, well, let's just give it a go and get it over and done with, that can actually build up those negative, not necessarily in our head because we know it should feel good, but in our body, it builds those connections that this isn't right, and we can start getting that tension through the pelvic floor, and a little bit of shutting down around that. So I think that approach of just pushing through is not one that we should be promoting to women. It's about how can we really open up our body around these things. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and how do you think our nervous system affects our like regulates itself and affects your pelvic energy?
Yeah. It's along the same lines, really. Like our bodies are incredible. They never do anything to harm us. They're always doing what they think it needs to be done to keep us safe. And again, if we've come through that birth experience, and I love how Dr. Oscar Serelak, who wrote the book The Postnatal Depletion Cure, he talks about the fact that we, as a culture, deal with mothering from a very psychological and cultural perspective. We've missed a lot of that biological need that underlies that, and we can be so quick to pathologize the mother and her experience rather than the environment that she's forced to mother in. And when we are mothering in isolation, without villages, without some of those basic universal needs that we know women need as they come through that mothering transition, it leaves us feeling really vulnerable. Our nervous system goes into that fight and flight response, or maybe even the next stage, that shutdown response. And if you're being chased by a tiger in the middle of, or a lion in the middle of Africa, like, you're not going to feel like getting it on. And I think so much of mothering, we can come through that process and our nervous system is on fire because it feels like we're being chased by that metaphorical lion or tiger, because we're not being supported as well as we should be through that transition. And it's no wonder that intimacy isn't something that we're necessarily feeling like engaging with in that process. So checking with the nervous system and what do we need to bring around us so that we can feel really safe and social and connected, so that our body's actually in that space where we can feel comfortable and confident exploring intimacy and pleasure So as much as we try, we can't talk our bodies into safety. Our body at a real visceral level knows whether we're feeling safe and secure in that place. So we have to come at it from a body-based perspective, not just in a cognitive assessment of, okay, no, actually I'm okay. It needs to be more than that, really felt in the body. And that is such an important process as we come through mothering, just checking in. Are we feeling grounded? Are we feeling safe and supported and connected? So that is, like, if we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's almost like that baseline for us to then want to progress to things like sex and intimacy.
And what might be some techniques or things that you can do to make sure that you're feeling safe, supported, or how can you feel grounded as well?
Yeah. Well, we know that there's some real universal needs of women as they make this transition, and one of them is rest. So I think sleep is something that we just need to prioritise to the max. And I think sometimes sleep and sex can feel like they're a bit of a trade-off from each other. But if a woman's not getting that sleep, she's not going to get that hormonal regulation that can only come when we're getting a reasonable amount of sleep. We really need to be prioritising rest, and sometimes that's drawing on our village or building that village around us to allow that. We know a woman needs really good nutrition as well. Again, so many of those hormones, they come from the fats and so forth that we're eating. And in most cultures, there's these traditions around what a postpartum diet looked like. And it was giving the woman those calories that she needed for breastfeeding, if that's what she was doing, but also helping her body recover and just restabilize all those hormonal levels. It's always been thought that postpartum women need touch, and this isn't sexual touch. I believe this is touch that helps regulate the nervous system. So whether that's just someone giving you a hug, or it might be a massage, but touch is a really lovely way to tap into your nervous system. The other thing we know that women need, mothers need at this time, is connection with other wise women. And I think it was probably those wise women that would be offering the touch as well. And yeah, that may not be face to face. It might be someone on a screen, especially during COVID times. But having someone there that can just hold that space for you is really important. And then it was always said that postpartum women needed to connect with nature. And at first that feels a bit weird. It's like, I've had a baby, why do I need to see trees? But really nature connects us into these bigger rhythms that we go through. Our menstrual cycle is a direct correlation to the seasons that we see around us. And that postpartum time is like a winter. It's a time of inner work. We're not necessarily so outward or social in our nature. It's that time of surrender. And I think connecting to nature helps tap us into the fact that we're going through this winter season at the moment, but the season after winter is spring. And from that, we can certainly emerge with a whole lot of energy and clarity and direction. So I think connecting with nature, whether that's going out in your backyard or going to the park or staring at the clouds, I think some of that connection to earth and those bigger rhythms can be really powerful as we reconnect to ourselves and how we're going to reconnect back into intimacy as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, you hear all the time, even just in general, how important it is to get out and be outside in the sun and exercise and just to really get all those feel good emotions and the positive effects that it has on your mental health as well.
Definitely.
And talking about menstrual cycles, what's your thoughts on how, I guess, birth and pregnancy and postpartum, how do they all intertwine together as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. I do a lot of work around how our relationship with our menstrual cycle can then play out in our birth and mothering experiences, but then also our birth and mothering experiences can imprint back into our menstrual cycles afterwards as an opportunity to help us process that mothering transition too. But when it comes to sex and intimacy, I think there can be a lot of fear around falling pregnant again if we're engaging in especially penetrative kind of intercourse. So again, I think it comes back to women not necessarily understanding their bodies, knowing the fact that you will probably ovulate before you actually have a menstrual cycle, before when your bleeding time returns after birth. Not everyone knows that about their bodies as well. So again, if we're feeling fearful of something, that's not going to be supporting our nervous system to be in that calm and connected place where sex and intimacy can flow from. So yeah, I think there's definitely some connections there.
And you run a course for women, and
yeah,
explain a bit about that.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, no, I run a course, The Menstrual Mother, which is all about helping women and people who bleed, who have a menstrual cycle, really connect into that rhythm and understand it so that they can use it as a roadmap for their self-care as well as for their mothering. Our menstrual cycle is kind of like the buried treasure that we didn't actually know was in our backyard. Most of us brought up with that conditioning that it's a curse and something that we have to have so we can have babies. But it's so much more than that when we really understand that rhythm and learn really practical ways of leaning into that. Our menstrual cycle. When we know how we change throughout our cycle, then we can actually work with our bodies rather than fighting them. So that's what the Menstrual Mother online course is all about.
Cool. And I guess finally, the last thing I want to touch on was how breastfeeding postpartum.
Yeah, no, definitely. So a lot of women do start breastfeeding when they have their baby, and certainly there are some changes to our hormones when we're breastfeeding. But I think another really big thing is that we can experience some vaginal dryness just because of those hormonal changes. So that can be a difference if you're used to experiencing a lot of wetness when you're turned on. That may not happen in that way if you are breastfeeding. So lube is a very good friend. But just being aware that your body might be responding differently to that intimacy. Just recognizing that that's a phase, that's what is happening at that point in time, and also recognizing that real close connection that you're going to have to your baby during that breastfeeding relationship as well, and just honoring that role that is happening at that particular point in time, and having conversations about that with your partner too.
Well, thank you. I feel like we've just learnt so much about the influence on mothering and how that impacts our intimacy and the way things change and evolve, and it's a really, I think, special time of life, and really great to hear. So thank you.
No problem. It's certainly a phase that we need to start thinking about as opportunity to re-explore our sexual selves and who we are going to be in that particular space, rather than seeing it as this negative change that happens. View it as opportunity, as it can be a pretty powerful and special time.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Excellent. I look forward to it. Thank you.